How do you measure the worth of a friendship forged in hell? When you've shared foxholes and rations, when you've kept each other awake on watch so the other wouldn't fall asleep and get you both killed, when you've seen each other at your absolute worst and somehow that made the bond stronger rather than weaker, what value can you place on that connection? And when that friend is taken from you in an instant, when one moment you're talking about what you'll do after the war, and the next moment, they're gone, bleeding out in your arms while you scream for a medic who arrives too late, how do you go on? How do you function when half of yourself has been ripped away? When the person who knew you better than anyone will never know anything again? I'm 94 years old and I lost my best friend 79 years ago on a muddy hillside on Okinawa, and I still haven't figured out how to fill the hole his death left in my life. His name was Samuel David Cohen, and this is the story of our friendship and his death and the decades I've spent learning to live with his absence. My name is William Thomas Parker, and I met Sam Cohen in basic training at Camp Shelby, Mississippi, in the summer of 1943. I was 18, fresh off a farm in Iowa, never been more than 50 miles from home, thrust into the Army and terrified I wouldn't measure up. Sam was also 18, from Brooklyn, Jewish, quick-witted, worldly in ways I couldn't imagine. We were assigned adjacent bunks in the barracks, and from day one, we were an unlikely pair. I was tall and gangly, slow-talking, earnest, with dirt still under my fingernails from farm work. Sam was short and compact, fast-talking, sarcastic, with an encyclopedic knowledge of baseball and movies and things that seemed exotic to a farm kid. We should have had nothing in common, should have existed in parallel without ever really connecting. But somehow, in the strange alchemy of military life, we became inseparable. Basic training was brutal for both of us, but in different ways. The physical demands were easy for me. I'd been doing manual labor since I could walk, but the regimentation and the constant yelling and the lack of privacy were torture for someone used to wide-open spaces and quiet. For Sam, the opposite was true. He was comfortable with crowds and noise and the urban pace of military life, but the physical training nearly broke him. He'd never done any manual labor, had grown up in a tenement in Brooklyn, where the most physical activity was climbing stairs. The first time we had to do a 10-mile march with full pack, Sam fell out after 6 miles, couldn't go on, sat by the side of the road while the drill sergeant screamed at him about being weak and letting down his unit. I went back for him, against orders, helped him up, took some of the gear from his pack and added it to mine, and got him moving again. The drill sergeant chewed me out for breaking formation, threatened me with extra duty, but he let us continue. Sam didn't say anything at the time, just kept putting one foot in front of the other. But that night in the barracks, he came to my bunk and said quietly, "Thanks, Bill. You didn't have to do that." I won't forget it. That was the beginning, the moment our friendship became real instead of just circumstantial proximity. Over the following weeks, Sam and I developed a partnership. I helped him with the physical demands of training, shared techniques I'd learned from farm work, encouraged him when he wanted to quit. He helped me with the academic side, the map reading and tactics and military knowledge that came easily to his sharp urban mind, but that confused my rural brain. We balanced each other, covered for each other's weaknesses, amplified each other's strengths. And we talked. Endless conversations during free time and guard duty and the moments between exhaustion and sleep. We told each other about our families, our dreams, our fears. Sam wanted to be a teacher after the war, wanted to get his degree on the GI Bill and teach history in New York City. I wanted to get back to the farm, to marry my girlfriend Mary, who was waiting for me back in Iowa, to raise kids and grow corn and live a quiet life. Our dreams were completely different, but we respected each other's visions, never questioned or mocked what the other wanted. We shipped to the Pacific together in early 1944, assigned to the same rifle company in the 96th Infantry Division. We went through additional training in Hawaii, miserable months of jungle warfare preparation, learning to fight in terrain completely foreign to both of us. The Pacific War was different from Europe, everyone said so. The Japanese didn't surrender, fought to the death, used tactics that violated every Western military convention. Banzai charges, kamikaze attacks, suicidal defensive positions that couldn't be held. We'd have to be ready for an enemy that didn't follow the rules, that would rather die than give up. The training was designed to harden us, to prepare us mentally for the kind of warfare we'd face. I don't think it worked. Don't think any training could really prepare you for the reality, but we went through it anyway. Sam and I made a pact during those training months in Hawaii. We'd watch out for each other, keep each other alive, make it through the war together. When the war was over, I'd come visit Sam in New York and he'd come visit me in Iowa, and we'd maintain the friendship we'd built. We'd be best men at each other's weddings, godfathers to each other's kids, friends for life. It seemed possible then, seemed like something we could will into existence through determination and mutual support. We didn't understand yet how little control we'd have over our fates, how random death was, how all the determination in the world couldn't stop a bullet or a shell with your name on it. Our division landed on Okinawa on April 1st, 1945, Easter Sunday, as part of the massive invasion force tasked with taking the island. The initial landing was unopposed, the Japanese having withdrawn to prepared positions in the southern part of the island, and we spent the first few days consolidating the beachhead and moving south. Sam and I stayed close. We're in the same fire team, rarely more than a few feet apart. We'd developed an almost telepathic understanding, could communicate with glances and gestures, knew what the other was thinking without needing words. That connection was valuable in combat, meant we could coordinate our actions, cover for each other, function as a two-man team within the larger unit structure. The real fighting started in mid-April when we hit the Japanese defensive lines in the south. The fighting was unlike anything we'd experienced in training, worse than anything we'd imagined. The Japanese had fortified every cave and ridge and tomb, had created a defense in depth that required us to fight for every yard of ground. The casualties were horrific. Entire companies getting chewed up assaulting positions that couldn't be flanked or bypassed. Sam and I fought through it together, keeping each other sane, keeping each other functional, maintaining the connection that had sustained us through training and deployment. On April 19th, our company was ordered to assault a ridge the maps called Hill 178, a Japanese strongpoint that dominated the surrounding terrain. The attack was preceded by artillery and airstrikes, but when we moved forward, the Japanese positions were still intact, machine guns and mortars firing from caves and bunkers we couldn't see. The assault stalled, we took casualties, and we ended up pinned down in shell craters and behind rocks while Japanese fire poured down on us. Sam was in the crater next to mine, maybe 10 feet away, and we were shouting to each other trying to figure out what to do, whether to advance or withdraw or just stay put and hope for support. That's when I saw the grenade, a Japanese Type 97 hand grenade, land in Sam's crater. It just appeared, thrown from a position we hadn't spotted, and it landed right at Sam's feet. He looked down at it, looked at me, and I saw his face go through a series of expressions in less than a second. Surprise, fear, calculation, and then something like resignation. He had maybe 2 seconds before it exploded, 2 seconds to make a decision. He could have jumped out of the crater, could have tried to get away, could have saved himself and let the grenade explode harmlessly in the empty hole. But there were 3 other Marines in that crater with him, kids from other squads who'd taken shelter there, and if Sam ran, they'd die. So he didn't run. He threw himself on the grenade, covered it with his body, and took the full force of the explosion. I saw it happen, was watching him when he made that decision, when he chose to die so others could live. The explosion was muffled by his body, most of the shrapnel absorbed by his flesh instead of flying outward to kill the other men. Sam was thrown to the side by the blast, and I could see immediately that it was fatal, that he'd taken wounds no one could survive. I was screaming, scrambling out of my crater, running the 10 feet to reach him while bullets snapped past. I dropped into his crater and pulled him into my lap, seeing the damage, seeing the blood, knowing there was nothing I could do but be there with him while he died. Sam was still conscious somehow, though he shouldn't have been. The pain must have been unimaginable, but he was looking at me with those sharp Brooklyn eyes trying to speak. I leaned close, put my ear near his mouth, and heard him whisper, "Did they make it? The other guys?" I looked around the crater and saw the 3 Marines, stunned but alive, untouched by the grenade because Sam had shielded them with his body. "They made it, Sam. You saved them. You saved all 3. He managed something like a smile. "Good. That's good. Then his face contorted with pain, and he grabbed my hand with surprising strength. Bill, you gotta do something for me. You gotta write my folks, tell them I wasn't scared, tell them I did something that mattered. Can you do that? I was crying, tears and snot running down my face, barely able to speak. I'll tell them, Sam. I promise. I'll tell them everything. But you're gonna be fine. The courtman's coming. We'll get you to an aid station. But we both knew I was lying, knew he was dying, knew these were our last moments together. Sam's breathing was getting shallower, his grip on my hand weakening. Bill, you remember our pact? About after the war? I nodded, unable to speak. You gotta keep it. You gotta live for both of us now. Go back to Iowa, marry Mary, have those kids. Do all the things we talked about. Live a good life, Bill. That's the only way this means anything. His voice was fading, and I had to lean closer to hear him. You were the best friend I ever had. Best friend anyone could have. I'm glad it was you here at the end. I'm glad I'm not alone. Those were his last words. His eyes lost focus. His hand went slack in mine, and Samuel David Cohen died in a crater on Okinawa, 19 years old, having lived just long enough to save 3 men he didn't even know. I don't know how long I sat there holding him. Could have been seconds, could have been minutes. Eventually, a corpsman came, checked Sam's pulse, shook his head, and moved on to treat the living. Someone pulled me out of the crater, told me I had to keep fighting, that we had to take the ridge. I moved like an automaton, following orders, shooting when told to shoot, advancing when told to advance. But I wasn't really there. Part of me died with Sam in that crater, and what was left was just going through the motions. We took Hill 178 eventually, at terrible cost, and that night I sat in a foxhole and tried to process what had happened. My best friend was dead, the person who'd known me better than anyone, who'd kept me sane through training and deployment, who'd been my anchor in the chaos of war, and he'd died in the most heroic way possible, sacrificing himself to save others, living up to every ideal the Marines preached about honor and sacrifice and putting others first. But that didn't make it hurt less, didn't fill the hole his absence created, didn't bring him back. I kept my promise to Sam. I wrote to his parents a long letter that took me 3 days to compose, telling them everything about their son's last moments. I told them he'd died bravely, that he'd saved 3 men with his sacrifice, that he hadn't suffered for long, that he'd been thinking of them at the end. I told them what Sam had meant to me, how his friendship had sustained me, how I'd never forget him, or what he'd done. I got a letter back from his mother 6 weeks later, a heartbreaking note thanking me for being with Sam at the end, for making sure he wasn't alone, for honoring his memory. She said knowing that Sam had died doing something heroic, saving others, made the loss slightly more bearable. Slightly. Not much, but slightly. I fought through the rest of the Okinawa campaign, through May and June until the island was finally secured. I was wounded twice, nothing serious, just enough to earn Purple Hearts that I didn't care about. I survived when Sam and so many others didn't, and that survival felt like both a gift and a curse. Sam had told me to live for both of us, and I tried, but I didn't know how to do that when grief consumed me, when everything reminded me of him, when I'd turn to say something to him and remember he wasn't there anymore. The war ended in August with the Japanese surrender, and I came home to Iowa in October 1945. I'd been gone for over 2 years, had left as a boy, and returned as a man marked by experiences no one at home could understand. Mary was waiting for me, faithful and loving, and we married in December. I went back to farming, built the life Sam and I had talked about, had the kids and the quiet existence that had been my dream. But Sam wasn't there to see it. Wasn't there to be my best man like we'd planned. Wasn't there to visit the farm and understand where I'd come from. His absence was a constant presence in my life, a ghost that haunted every milestone and achievement. I visited Sam's parents in Brooklyn in 1947, fulfilled another unspoken promise, met the people who'd raised the friend who'd saved my life, and so many others. They welcomed me like I was their son, fed me dinner, showed me Sam's room which they'd preserved exactly as he'd left it. His mother cried and said I looked like him somehow, carried myself the same way, and that seeing me was both painful and comforting. His father asked me to tell them stories about Sam, about our friendship, about the good times before the end. I told them everything I could remember, painted a picture of Sam as he'd been during training and deployment, funny and smart and brave. I didn't tell them about the worst parts, the fear and the hardship, and the moments when Sam had questioned whether he could go on. They didn't need to know those things, they just needed to know their son had been loved, had mattered, had died for something meaningful. I maintained contact with Sam's family for years, sent Christmas cards, called on Sam's birthday and the anniversary of his death. His parents both died in the 1960s, and the connection faded after that. But I never forgot Sam, never stopped thinking about him, never stopped wondering what he would have done with his life if he'd survived. Would he have become the teacher he dreamed of being? Would he have married, had children, grown old? Would our friendship have survived the transition from wartime bonds to peacetime distance? I'll never know, and that uncertainty is part of the grief I carry. The 3 Marines that Sam saved with his sacrifice all survived the war. I tracked them down in the 1950s, wrote to them, asked if they remembered April 19, 1945, and the Marine who died to save them. All 3 remembered, all 3 said Sam's sacrifice had haunted them, that they'd tried to live lives worthy of that gift. One became a doctor, said he'd gone into medicine because Sam had saved his life and he wanted to save others. Another became a teacher, said he taught because Sam had wanted to teach and now he could do it for both of them. The third became a minister, said Sam's sacrifice had shown him what true love looked like and he'd dedicated his life to sharing that message. Hearing their stories helped, knowing that Sam's death had meaning beyond that moment, that his sacrifice had rippled out through decades and touched countless lives. But it didn't bring him back, didn't fill the hole his absence created. Mary understood as much as someone who wasn't there could understand. She never met Sam, but she knew him through my stories, through the grief I carried, through the way I'd sometimes go quiet on April 19th or on what would have been his birthday. She never resented Sam's memory, or felt threatened by my continued mourning of a friend who'd been dead for decades. She understood that some losses never heal completely, that some absences never stop aching. That's one of the reasons our marriage lasted 62 years until she passed in 2007. She accepted all of me, including the parts that were still grieving a friend lost in 1945. I went back to Okinawa in 1995 for the 50th anniversary of the battle. I visited the cemetery where Sam is buried, stood at his grave in the orderly rows of white crosses, and talked to him for the first time in 50 years. I told him about my life, about Mary and our 4 children and 8 grandchildren, about the farm that had prospered, about the quiet, good life I'd built. I told him I'd tried to live for both of us like he'd asked, that I'd done my best to make my life matter, to honor his sacrifice by living well. I told him I'd never forgotten him, that not a week had gone by in 50 years when I hadn't thought about him. And I apologized for surviving when he didn't, for having all the experiences and joys and sorrows of a long life when his had been cut short at 19. Standing at Sam's grave, I finally cried in a way I hadn't been able to cry in 50 years. I'd cried when he died, shallow tears mixed with shock and horror and disbelief. But I'd never really mourned, never let myself fully feel the loss because I'd had to keep functioning, had to keep fighting, had to keep living. But there at his grave, 5 decades later, I finally let myself grieve completely. I cried for the friend I'd lost, for the life he never got to live, for the friendship that had sustained me and then been ripped away. I cried for the boy I'd been who'd lost his best friend, and for the old man I'd become who still missed him. The tears felt like they'd never stop, like 50 years of grief was pouring out all at once. But eventually they did stop, and I felt lighter somehow, like I'd finally given Sam the mourning he deserved. I'm 94 years old now, and Sam has been dead longer than he was alive, has been gone for 79 years while I've lived on. I've had a full life, a good life, exactly the kind of life Sam told me to live. I've experienced joys and sorrows, successes and failures, the full range of human existence. But there's always been a Sam-shaped hole in my life, a space where my best friend should have been, sharing experiences, offering his perspective, being the person who knew me best. I wonder sometimes what he'd think of the world we live in now, what he'd think of the life I've lived, whether he'd be proud or disappointed or just glad I kept my promise. The pain of losing Sam has changed over the decades. The acute agony of those first years has faded into a chronic ache, something I've learned to live with rather than something that incapacitates me. But it's never gone away completely, never stopped hurting, never become just a memory without emotional weight. Some losses are too profound to ever fully heal, some absences too significant to ever fill. Sam was my best friend in a way no one else has ever been, forged in circumstances that stripped away all pretense and revealed essential character. That kind of friendship doesn't come along twice in a lifetime, and losing it was like losing part of myself. I think about Sam every day still, 79 years later. I wonder what he'd say about current events, what jokes he'd make, how his sharp mind would analyze the world we live in. I imagine conversations we'll never have, experiences we'll never share, the friendship that could have spanned decades but was cut short on a muddy hillside in Okinawa. And I honor his memory by trying to live the way he died, putting others first, making sacrifices when necessary, doing what's right, even when it's hard. That's all I can do, all any of us can do for the friends we've lost. Remember them, honor them, try to live in ways that justify their sacrifice. Sam saved 3 men when he threw himself on that grenade, but he saved me too in a different way. His sacrifice showed me what courage really looks like, what love really means, what it means to give everything for others. His death taught me that life is precious and short and should be lived fully, that every day is a gift that shouldn't be wasted, that the relationships we build are more important than anything else. I've tried to live according to those lessons, tried to be worthy of Sam's sacrifice and his friendship. I don't know if I've succeeded, but I've tried, and that's all Sam ever asked of me. The grief of losing Sam has shaped my entire life, has influenced every decision and every relationship. It's taught me to cherish the people I love, to tell them how I feel while I still can, to never take friendship for granted. It's made me more compassionate toward others who've lost people they love, more understanding of the ways grief changes you, more patient with the mourning process that never really ends. Sam's death was the most significant event of my life, more defining than my marriage or my children or any success I've achieved. It marked me permanently, changed me into someone different than I would have been if Sam had survived. I'll join Sam soon. My time is running out and I find myself thinking more and more about what comes next. Will I see Sam again? Will there be some reunion where we can pick up our friendship, continue the conversations that were interrupted in 1945? I'd like to believe that, but I don't know. What I do know is that Sam Cohen was my best friend, that he saved my life and the lives of 3 others, that he died the way he lived, putting others first. And I know that his memory has sustained me through 79 years, has been a constant presence in my life, has made me a better person than I would have been without him. That's the legacy of our friendship, and it's a legacy I'll carry with me until my last breath. If this story moved you, if it helped you understand the bonds between soldiers and the grief of losing a friend in combat, I'd be honored if you'd subscribe to hear more stories from World War II veterans. Share your thoughts in the comments below. Remember Samuel David Cohen and all the others who sacrificed everything for their brothers in arms. Remember that friendship forged in combat is unlike anything else, and that losing those friends leaves wounds that never fully heal. Thank you for listening to this old Marine's memories of his best friend and the day he lost him. Semper Fi, Sam. You're not forgotten.